Support for Flying Valiant builds is brought to you by 1st and 64th Customs, where no diecast is safe. Video Geek Productions, all business, all geek. The Brian Smith YouTube channel. Clever schemes for fun and profits. A generous grant from the Jonathan Vonesh Foundation, and from support from viewers like you. Please like, share, and subscribe.
Snow-Trac, darling, light of my life. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna...
Hey there folks, Chuck here, and yep, we're back doing another 3 Blind Mice build, and I'm really excited about this one. When they announced the Snow-Trac, I kind of immediately knew what I wanted to do, but it was a little intimidating because this is by far the oldest casting I've ever done. I've never worked with a matchbox of this vintage before, and the pressure was kind of high with this one because it's also one of the more expensive castings that I've worked with, and that's not really saying much. I think this thing cost $10 in this condition, and as you can see, it's pretty much the worse for wear, but I knew I'd have to get creative to do what I wanted to do, because the replacement tracks were an extra $10, and I wasn't really going to spend $20 just to get started on this casting. But I ended up getting very lucky by finding a thrift store bag with a bulldozer that had almost exactly what I needed for replacement tracks. But we'll get to that in a minute. Right now, let's dive in with the breakdown. First, I wanted to recreate the Snow-Trac from the Overlook Hotel in the movie The Shining. I wanted to use weathering elements to create a snow effect, because I've never done snow effects before, and as a 6th generation native Floridian, I feel completely ill-equipped to tackle any elements involving snow accumulation or weathering, but since that's a blind spot, it is something that I wanted to get better at. So I thought I'd take a whack at it, if you'll pardon the expression, with this build. And since having a snow-covered vehicle looks a little strange by itself, I wanted to create a display base featuring the iconic Hedge maze from the Overlook Hotel. And finally, I wanted to keep the lame shining jokes to a minimum. We'll see how we do on that last one. Ready? Grab your favorite red rum, punch that subscribe button, and let's boogie. The immediate problem with the Snow-Trac, even though it's wrongly referred to as a snowcat in the movie, is that it's obviously in very good shape, being the main snowcat for a luxury hotel. So since there wasn't going to be a lot of opportunity for actual weathering, that's why I decided I wanted to do a lot of snow effects. Also, you'll notice there are a lot of details on this Snow-Trac that are not on the actual kit, namely the headlights on the front fenders and the railings along the sides. So once I started looking at reference pictures, I realized I had to make some modifications. Unfortunately, I realized that after I had already gone through the trouble of dismantling, sanding, and priming the Snow-Trac, so I had to go back over the primer, add the modifications, and then reprime the vehicle. So we were off to a great start. Now, as for the tread problem, as I mentioned earlier, I got very lucky and found this no-name bulldozer toy in a thrift store, and it just happened to have treads that were almost perfect for what I needed. They were a little on the snug side, but I consider that kind of a good thing. And it really doesn't matter much because it's not going to be moving, it's going to be on a display base. Then I needed to make my markings for the headlights and the protective rails around the headlights, and make my punches. That's where I realized I didn't know my own strength when it came to the punches. That or this metal is just a bit thinner than it should be. And I bent things a little extremely making those initial punches, so I had to go back and hammer things into place, and it's still not quite there, but it's good enough that you won't really notice on the final product. And I did it again when I went to punch the holes for the side rails. But once I had everything punched, I went in with a 1mm drill bit and gently made the holes for the railings to go in. Because of the bend in the body, the grill wouldn't sit quite flush on the chassis, so I decided to cut it out and then replace it. Once I cut the grill out, I realized I needed a little bit more of a lip than what I had cut out, so I glued in this L piece of styrene and then cut a grill opening into that. Again, kind of sloppy work, but I knew I was going to be covering this area with a lot of effects later, so it didn't really matter. I just needed it to be a solid base to work off of. And once I had the grill opening, I used the screening from an old microphone windscreen that had this very fine metal mesh around it that cuts very easily and is kind of perfect for making grills and screens in this scale. It would probably be closer to actual chain link fence in this scale, but there's a lot of forgiveness that your eye gives in 1/64th scale for how big something will be because it's such a small scale. So I think it was a perfect substitute for the metal grill that was in there. And to make the headlights, I used some Hot Wheels axles, bent with alignment pliers initially, and then finished to a 90-degree angle using some dull nail clippers, and then cut again with alignment pliers, and watch this. It completely disappeared. Yeah, it turned out it got tucked up under the lip in the lineman's pliers, but by that point I had already made another one. Oh well. I was kind of struggling initially with what to use for the rail protecting the headlights, and then it hit me that Christmas tree hooks were kind of perfect for this because they're rigid but very, very easy to bend. So made some hairpin-like curves by wrapping it around a pair of tweezers and glued them into place through the holes. And it's not a perfect recreation, but it gets the effect across. Much like my rails on the side here, those side areas where I'm drilling through would be actually additional rails, but I didn't have the time to go in and carve those out and replace them with actual rails. So I used a little artistic license and just drilled a millimeter hole through on each side and then fed some more Christmas tree hanging hook wire through to create the horizontal rails. And I did my best to disguise it with some of the effects that you'll see later. And now for real this time, I can actually reprime and paint everything. I went with Vallejo red as the base and then added a few drops of burnt sienna to darken the red a little bit. I know I'm usually harping on how things are too dark on scales of this size, and usually I would probably actually try to lighten the color, but because I knew I was doing a lot of snow effects and the wetness of the environment would probably make things look darker, I decided to go with a darker color. Also because we're doing a horror theme build, so you want things to be a little more dark and foreboding. To do the dark roof on the Snow-Trac, I used Vallejo's Game Colors Extra Opaque Heavy Charcoal, and I gotta say this is one of my new favorite kinds of paint. It lays so smoothly, and it is exactly as it defines, extra opaque. It's like one coat and done. It's really great to work with. So I'm definitely gonna have to look more into their game types of paint, because I think they're right on par, if not better, than the Citadel paints. And they're, I think, slightly cheaper too. And while I had the paint out, I decided to do the cover areas on the undersides of the running boards and inside the interior, and the kind of spots that you want people to ignore more. I also think putting the darker stuff underneath the vehicle adds some weight to it. Here's where things went off the rails a little bit. I realized in my reference materials that this upper area is actually a opening window, and I thought the best way to simulate that in a hurry instead of cutting it out was to paint it silver chrome and then go over it with turn signal amber, and we'll see that not working out well. But in the meantime, I was very excited that I was able to bust out my track wash and actually use it on tracks, which is a rare thing when you're doing mostly cars. And here's the turn signal amber going on and not going on well, so I knew I was going to have to fix that. But first, I went to the glass. I don't really know why I put so much effort into the glass when, well, you'll see what happens later, but it's good practice, and I was able to polish this stuff up pretty well. I started with 500 grit sandpaper and worked my way up to 2500 grit sandpaper. Then I used flits, then I used some plastic polish to bring everything to a nice shine, and then dipped in the floor pledge, and that seemed to do a good job. Before I painted over the roof, I realized in my reference photos that all of the windows on the Snow-Trac have black rubber around the sides, so the heavy charcoal came out again, because it's a good very dark gray, and as I've said a million times, I try to avoid using pure white and pure black whenever possible, especially black, because I feel like that very rarely shows up in reality, especially on used things. And I went over the roof again, and this time just went over the dark with the turn signal amber. Again, it didn't turn out great, but I knew that I was going to be covering most of it up anyway, and you'll see that in a little bit. The mirror paint did its wondrous job with the toothpick, to add all the chrome accents. There's not many, but there's a few door handles and doing the lights and stuff. And I used some bare metal foil to get the trim piece down the middle of the hood because there's really no lip there and it would have been very hard to hand paint that. And with that, it was time to put everything together and get to the decals. Thanks to my fancy printer that can print white toner, I was able to create the water slide decals for this. So I've been very fortunate that I've been able to do a fair amount of commissions recently using my printer and helping some other builders with their work. And that's definitely helped me be able to continue in this hobby as I figure out where my next steps are career-wise. Once the decals had dried, I went over them with a little microsol to make sure that they bonded well with the paint, and then went over that once it was dry with some satin clear coat. Once the turn signal amber had dried, and as you can see it did not dry very well, I went over the top with some Tamiya dark gray panel liner just to murky it up some, add some irregularities to it. Not that there weren't enough irregularities already with the way the paint settled, but again, I'm asking this paint to do something that it's not supposed to do, which is cover a large surface area. And that was about all I could do on the Snow-Trac before getting to the snow effects. So let's take a break from the Snow-Trac and get to I had forgotten how complex the maze actually is in the movie, and I'm not talking about the actual path of the maze, but the actual construction of it. That it has these cutouts and the pyramid-shaped spires on top. And originally I was just going to do a flat wall, and then I realized that would not be true to where I wanted this to be in the movie. So I had to get creative. And as luck would have it, I stumbled across a little gold mine in my neighborhood. One of my neighbors had moved out of state in, I guess, kind of a hurry and left a bunch of stuff in their house when it sold. And one of those things was this creepy little wooden plaque. They actually threw out a lot of plaques, and plaques make fantastic display bases. So if you got any of those lying around, or you know somebody who's getting rid of them, turn them into display bases. It's nice, it's ready made. They're usually perfect size to sit on a shelf. You just take off the hardware, fill in the holes, sand it down, and cover with your favorite texture paint. To do the hedge, I decided to work with these old cork coasters I had lying around. The compressed cork is very easy to cut, but still pretty rigid. I also had these strips of balsa wood, which is very easy to cut even with just a hobby knife. I should have gone the proper route and used a miter box and saw, which I ended up using later to line everything up. But again, I knew this was all going to be covered, so didn't have to be surgical in my accuracy. I used a second coaster and my circle tool to create the cutout, and bound 4 pieces of the balsa wood together with super glue, then cut those level with my miter box and glued on either sides for the pillars. Then to create the pyramids, I just took the same thing again, a group of 4 pieces cut level, and then just cut from one edge to the other diagonally on all 4 pieces. Ended up with a pyramid that was slightly smaller than the actual pillars, which works with the prototype hedge from the movie. I originally was going to try wood glue with this stuff, but super glue works just so much faster. This is just black craft paint that I wanted to cover everything in so you couldn't see any of the cork shining through. And then I used some matte Mod Podge and some water to create a film to go over the black. And originally I had some conifer green foliage, and then I realized it was on like a sponge material and it would have taken me days to get all the pieces off and onto it. And I had all this medium green fine turf, but it was way too bright for the hedge that I wanted to do. So I remembered, oh yeah, once it's on there, you can actually paint it to whatever color you want. So I went with that, and it was much, much faster. And then I took it to the paint booth, threw some Vallejo olive green into my airbrush, and put it on a layer, and it definitely darkened it up some, but you know, in the movie, it appears almost black. And I wanted it to have that kind of sinister look, so I went over it again with olive green and a few drops of black in it to really darken it up. Then it was off to the 3D printing to build the maze display. And this is a little trick I learned for drilling placements and getting it relatively accurate. You just put a bit of paint on the bottom of whatever it is that you're trying to place, and then drop it into location, and you end up with a little spot right where you want your piece to be. And because I wanted these to be pretty close to parallel, I used some rulers to line things up, and then made my precision marks with the toothpick. And it was just a bit of drilling and some countersinking, a little more drilling, a little matching, and we had everything in place. I didn't drill all the way through for the little map stand, just enough that I could sink it in and use some glue to hold it in place when it was ready. I used that heavy charcoal again on the underside of the roof so that the inside appears much deeper and darker than it actually is. And then I used weathered wood from AK Interactive, which is a good dark color, as the base, and then dry brushed over that with a little wood base color to lighten things up. Oh yeah, I also 3D printed this little stump that I added a axe to in Tinkercad. It's not accurate to the movie, but you gotta have an axe in a shining display. There's a little more dry brushing with some fresh cut wood, a little varnished wood, and some wood grain, just to add a little texture. The map display was something I made myself in Tinkercad, except for the roof. The roof was from somebody's Norse building display that had kind of a rough shingled roof like the one in the movie, so I added that to my design and then created the little spires on top, which you'll see will disappear over the course of this build because I dropped that thing twice, and the first time one piece broke off and disappeared into nothingness, and the second time I dropped it, the other one went. So I had to 3D print new spires on the top because it took pretty much a full day to print that thing. So I didn't really want to go back and print the whole thing again, so I just printed the spires and glued them back on top at the end. I used varnished wood for the axe handle and a little mirrored paint for the axe head, and wood base with some wood grain for the stump and fresh cut timber for the middle of the stump, and then went over the whole thing with AK Interactive's wash for wood, which is basically just a dark brown enamel wash. I made the decals based on a still from the movie and a recreated map that somebody had online, and then laid a little ultra matte on top of them so that they would be sealed in. And that was just a little CA glue to hold the map stand in place and add the stump for the foreground. And with that, it was time for... There are a lot of ways to add snow and winter weathering, and it just so happens I had most of them, including this winter weathering set, this snow from Stuart Semple, who does the mirror paint, this liquid frost that came out from Green Stuff World recently, this secret weapon crushed glass, this Tamiya weathering kit, and another AK Interactive snow effect set. It came with instructions, but they weren't that helpful. Moving on. I couldn't decide which set to use, so I decided to use all of them. I started with the winter weathering set from AK Interactive. It has an effect called Winter Streaking Grime, which is basically just a thin, grimy gray paint that you lay onto stuff, and when it dries you go back over it with some mineral spirits and lightly stroke it into a streaked effect. So I wanted to lay that on first so that all the snow effects on top of it would look like they had covered the older effects of the snow that had been on it and melted. Again, the trick here was making it look weathered without making it look derelict, just like it's in peak snow season, so it's being used a lot without a lot of time for washing and maintenance in between. Then it was time for the lighter snow effects. I used the Tamiya weathering powders to create a lightened look around the lips and the ridges on the vehicle where snow would accumulate and spread. I kept most of it off the hood because I figured that area would be warm from the engine running, so there wouldn't be as much snow accumulation there. This is the AK Interactive acrylic snow effect that came in both sets of paint, so I've got plenty of that. And I really like this. It's a very odd texture paint. It feels more like painting on foam. Like it feels like it's foam. I think it probably uses micro balloons, and that's the feel I get from it anyway. I'm not sure how it's constructed, but it's an acrylic paint, which is handy. But it was also very easy to work with. It has this nice translucent effect where it would look like in thinner spots much more transparent, like melting snow. So it has a good slushy effect to it. And again, now you can see why I wasn't too worried about the roof, because I knew that I was going to be covering most of it in snow. Now here's where I got a little too creative for my own good. I decided it was too large of an area to use all my fancy stuff, so I wanted to thin it out a little bit with a cocktail of matte medium, baking soda, and then mixing in the other effects, because I felt like the Stuart Semple stuff was a bit too big. It's a mix of like white and glittery, rainbowy type effects, and it would probably be great in a larger scale, but on its own it would be way too big for 1/64 scale. And the crushed glass felt a little too one-dimensional, so I decided to mix them all together and create this slurry if you will, of the different materials. And I think it turned out rather well. I didn't do any precise measuring. I just mixed it to where I felt like it was looking good. Then went in with a paintbrush and started dabbing things on. And I was doing pretty well with it at first. I was, trying to keep my fingers out of it as much as possible because it was just really messy. And laying it on with a spoon and then stippling into place, lots of stippling, because it wouldn't be a Flying Valiant build without a lot of stippling. And then it started running in spots and I started cleaning it up. And as I got more familiar with it, I got a little less careful with it and started using my finger to move stuff around, forgetting that it's crushed glass. And yeah, it gets in your fingers. It feels like you got a million splinters in your fingers and you can't do anything about it because it's tiny pieces of crushed glass. So, anyway, that's my PSA to you. If you're going to work with that stuff, don't put your fingers in it. Use gloves, please. So, as the stuff was drying, I periodically would go through and put the Snow-Trac in place to create the tire tracks. And then I filled in the area where the treads had gone down to the base with a little white paint. So once I was done with the slurry, I decided to add the stuff that I was really excited to work with, which is the Green Stuff World Liquid Frost. And if you've watched any videos on this, it seems like magic. It really isn't, though. Like, once you get into it, it says on the side it's a saline solution that creates crystals. So it seems like it's just like a really heavy salt water concoction. Like there's something else in it that's, I think, a little bit more than salt water, because it's kind of like those science experiments that we did as a kid where you'd grow crystals on pieces of charcoal. So there's something else to it because it creates crystals that I think you would not be able to do with just salt water. But it really does have like some very interesting effects to it, and it was intriguing to work with. I wanted to see if I could create icicles on the roof line and create some frost effects on the windows and around some of the larger surface areas of the Snow-Trac. And I was surprised at how quickly it responded. Like it says results in 4 to 24 hours, but I was seeing definite changes in matters of minutes on the things that I was painting it on. And I don't know if that's because this is Florida and you can cut the humidity with a knife or what. But yeah, it showed up really quickly. I also used a little engine oil here to add some glossy effects because I realized that underneath the tracks was really matte, and that would not be reflective of all of the greasy workings and the water and stuff that would be mixing together under this thing as it ran. I did a little more touch up on the base using the liquid crystals, but again, I didn't really see much show up on porous spots like the Hedge. It showed up a lot better on the much more hard surfaces like the pavilion roofline. I got a little clever for my own good here and thought I would add some grime to the Snow-Tracs, and I ended up not liking it and covered most of it back up later. But once I was sure all of the snow had glued itself in place, I went around the edge with some more of that heavy charcoal just to clean up the base outline. And once everything had dried fully, I went over top of my slurry mix with a little bit more of the AK Interactive Snow Effects just because it had dried a little flatter than I wanted, and I wanted to add some texture, like slight drifting was starting to happen. I guess that's something that snow does, right? It drifts. Just to break up the base a little bit. I mean, it was fortunate working with this that the reference material is an actual very flat surface, so I didn't have to worry about actual like terrain or anything, but I didn't want it to look like it was just a flat board either. And with that, the base was finished. It's time to add a Flying Valiant decal to it, which was weird because I've never really like labeled a display base before, but I figured I would label it, give it the number, and just for good measure, do the Snow-Trac too. And with that, we were ready for the final reveal. So one more time, let's take a look at what we started with. This very, very battered vintage Matchbox Snow-Trac. And here's where we ended up. The Overlook Hotel Snow-Trac out on the job, fighting off a coming blizzard as the caretaker makes his rounds before sealing up the hotel. So this one was a lot of fun. I'm really happy with how it turned out. It looks amazing on my shelf, and it would look amazing on your shelf too. If you're a big Shining fan, or if you know someone who likes The Shining and likes die-cast cars, then this would be a great gift item. I like it. I'm more than happy to have it on my shelf, but like all of my builds. It is for sale and it is not a commission, so it is open to offers. So if you want this or you want me to build something like this for you, hit me up at flyingvaliant@gmail.com. I want to take this moment to thank my patrons again. You saw the presenting sponsors at the beginning of this video, but I also want to thank Mid-Island Customs Diecast. Thank you, Evan. He's been with me for a very long time, and I've been doing some commission work for him, which he will get a discount on as a Patreon member. My wife, Carolyn, the world's best math tutor on Zoom, and Andrew over at Maple Leaf Matchbox Makeovers. Like Evan, Andrew has an amazing YouTube channel. Please check him out in the description below. And my newest Rockford level patron, Double B's Customs. So thank you, Brett. Go check out his channel. It's relatively new, and he could definitely use more subscribers seeing the incredibly talented stuff that he is doing over there. And I'd also like to thank my Douglas level patrons, the Good Bad Better podcast, Jordan Kleinman, Curtis Craft's YouTube channel, Jim Silva YouTube channel, Devil's Details Diecast YouTube channel, and Gary Tasker, my newest patron. Be sure to visit Flying Valiant on Instagram and Facebook and follow along with the fun over there. My patrons will be getting a full gallery of photos on top of the Instagram posts, and they get early access to these videos as well as personal access to me, discounts on commissions, and all sorts of other fun stuff. So you can check out how to join the Flying Valiant racing team over at flyingvaliant.com. If you really like what we do and you want to show it off to the world, you can get t-shirts, stickers, and all sorts of other fun stuff over at the J.E. Peg Design stores on Tee Public and on Redbubble. My brother Justin does all the graphics for this show, and I'm very grateful to him. And he's got a new line of Redline inspired designs over on his store, so be sure to check those out using some of the more iconic tampos from the early days of Hot Wheels. And he's going to be doing some other retro designs based on vintage diecast designs. So if there's a particular car that you want to see the design emulated on a t-shirt or a sticker, be sure to drop a comment below and let us know what you'd like to see. As always, I want to thank the Three Blind Mice for hosting this event. It was nice to get back in the saddle and do another challenge, and I'm looking forward to the next one, which will be the Hudson Hornet build that's coming up mid-February, so be sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss that one. We've got some other commissions that I'm working on that are going to be a lot of fun to show off. There's a lot of cool stuff coming. I've got some more stuff from SK75 Works that I'm going to be showing off that is also really cool. And again, I just want to thank everyone who has supported me through this. And if you're watching this in January, there's still time to get in on the 800 subscriber giveaway, which I will link to in the description below, where I'll be giving away one of our prototype display mats that my brother and I have been working on. We've gotten a lot of great responses so far, and we've got a lot of great ideas for some future designs, but this is our initial way to show you what we're working on and do something fun for the people who have subscribed. We're getting very close to the 1,000 subscriber mark, and I will be doing another giveaway at that point, so be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to get us that much closer to doing another fun giveaway. Hope you like this build. It's one of my favorites so far, and I really like how the snow effect turned out. All you northerners can let me know in the comments where I screwed up on snow application. Again, I apologize for being a Floridian who enjoys nice mild climates with no snow ever, but it was a fun challenge and I'm glad I did it, and I really want to thank you for coming along with me for the ride. So, until next time, stay fresh, cheese bags.